Ever wish you could ask a lawyer for some advice about your gym? If so, keep listening to Two Brain Radio and be sure to subscribe for more shows just like this. Now, in September 2021, I found out a gym owner who appeared on the show was also a lawyer. Fast forward, and Matthew Becker of Industrial Athletics has launched gymlawyers.com to help fitness entrepreneurs navigate the legal world. Now, he's not one of those out-of-touch lawyers who doesn't understand your gym. He's one of us. We accept him. Google gobble, we accept him. Today, he's going to offer some insight on common legal issues gym owners face. I'm Mike Workington. Matthew, I have questions for you. The first one, you've been called to the bar. Are you ready for a barbell exam?
Hey, good morning, Mike. Yes, I'm ready for the barbell exam.
Good. I use that joke on every lawyer I've ever trained at my gym, and it never gets old, at least for me. I got one
when I
guy.
was in law school, we always had there was a T-shirt that said something about I graduated law school and passed every bar on the way. And it was like an alley of all the bars in town. So
I'm sure I understand exactly how that goes. So I'm thinking this one lawyer I always made that joke to. He always laughed for me, which I appreciated. So let's talk lease issues. This is lease issues are a huge deal for gym owners. I'll give you a very quick story. I didn't want to pay a lawyer to review the lease that was supplied by my landlord's agent. Thought it was a waste of money, but I had it done anyway. That expense paid off big time down the line when she changed in the lease that was supplied to me. It saved me a ton of money. So Matthew, what are some of the most common issues gym owners miss that aren't in leases that aren't reviewed by an attorney? And we're talking like the top three. What are the big ones here?
Yeah, I'll go top three, but I will say for your future interactions with attorneys, being limited on like only give me three is like a terrible thing for us. So we hate to be limited to speak.
I understand for sure.
Anyway, yeah. So top three. All right, I'll try this.
We'll try it.
Top one is rent. Understanding not only base rent and how it's calculated, but then everything else that gets added on to your base rent that equals your monthly rent.
Okay, that's a huge one.
So that'd be number one.
Okay.
Number two is use of premises and how that is described in the lease versus like what you're actually able to do and what you're trying to do versus what the landlord thinks you're doing. And then number three is all of the additional things that you're in charge of as the tenant, like maintenance and insurance and covering insurance costs.
Okay.
So those are the big three.
So there's a ton more, but
yes,
those are already like huge things. So let's just dig in. Talk to me about lease issues with regard to rent. You see a number. Is that the final number? What's hidden in there? What are we not seeing?
Okay, so there's typically going to be about 3, maybe 4 different numbers that are going to come into what finally equals your monthly rent. Now, a lot of gym owners that we talk to give us leases and they say, yeah, my rent's going to be $3,500 a month. And I get it. And I start looking at the lease and I see that their base rent is $3,500 a month. So there's a difference between your base rent and your actually monthly rent.
Okay.
Base rent is simply the price per square foot that you're paying. It's the amount of square footage multiplied by, let's say, $10 a square foot, divided by 12, and that's your base rent. That's just for the square footage.
Okay, so that's your top number, but there's more.
Right. Yeah, there's more. The most common thing that then gets added onto that are generally what's called CAM fees, C-A-M, CAM short for common area maintenance fees. There's a couple of different industry names for those, but they're all the same thing. They're CAM fees. And what that means is it's the cost that is associated with basically keeping your building up and running. So that might be repair of roofing, that might be snow removal, mowing the lawn, whatever additional costs the landlord has to pay in order to keep the building in good condition. Those are CAM fees. And that gets added on to the base rent.
Okay. So that can those be significant?
They can be. And they will adjust typically year to year because the landlord's costs go up year to year. And
So
so
that
not
could
to
be
really
like snowfall, right? Like, so we're talking like maybe there's a record snowfall and the landlord's got to plow the parking lot 17 times instead of 6. Those things could then come back in a CAM fee. And I guess that's calculated each year. And then is it like backdated to the previous year, or how does that work?
So, and not to get like too much into math, right? When we're talking, and I can't be like math on the example behind me. But typically what you have is the CAM fee that you pay throughout the year is an estimate based on last year's CAM fee. Okay. And so at the end of the year, there's a reconciliation, and there's going to end up being 2 numbers that come out of that reconciliation. One is going to be the estimated payment for the next year. And the second number that's going to come out of it is basically the difference payment compared to what you were paying every month compared to the actuality of the CAM fee. Okay. So you pay $500 a month in CAM fees for year number 1. And at the end of year number 1, they reassess what the CAM fees are, and they realize that CAM fees were actually $800 a month. Going forward, your rent will increase by $300 a month, the difference between that 500 and 800. You're also going to get a bill that says last year they should have been 800, there were only 500, so now you have to pay $300 times 12 in order to make up the difference of what they should have been.
Okay, so we won't dig into that too far because we're getting into the niggly diggly there, but that's you've got 2 big ones already. So we've got like your base rent, and let's say it's like $750 a square foot or something like that. Then you've got your CAM fees, which will be like, I don't know, I've seen stuff like $750 plus $250 or something like that or whatever. Just as throwing out ideas, but you will go see those 2 numbers. What else are people often missing in leases? Are there other fees that are going to jump up?
A lot of the unknown fees come in if the landlord requires you to pay all of your utilities.
Okay, that's a big one.
So electric, water, heating, cooling, depending on where your gym is located. And the landlord is not going to know what those numbers are. So those are going to be unknown numbers. And the other big issue that we run into with utilities is some utilities sometimes are included in the CAM fees, and some utilities sometimes are metered out to the individual tenant. And so it's really important for the gym owner to know going in which utilities are covered in the CAM fees and which utilities are individual to that gym.
Okay. So I guess the best advice here is when a gym owner is scrolling through the listings and looking, you see a square footage fee. The best thing you could probably take away from this is that is one of the several fees that you will be paying that will go into your building. So on top of that, you're going to have maintenance fees. On top of that, you're going to have utilities, which in some cases will be billed by the landlord. In other cases might be like I signed up for my own hydro account, for example, but my landlord took care of water and billed me back for that. So like, it just depends on metering and things like that. But the lesson here is the square footage fee is not the only fee you have to worry about.
Correct. Yep.
When you review leases for gym owners, what do you see? Like you see stuff in there that's like not hidden, but the gym owners just won't understand or they're not aware of, like, and how do you explain that to them?
Well, sometimes we don't even understand it.
Okay.
It can get so complicated. We reviewed a lease recently, and we had to go back to the gym owner and say, there's about 5 different fees contemplated in this lease. Only 2 of them really have numbers associated with them. You need to go back to the landlord and ask what these other fees are. Typically what we do when we review a lease is we'll take all of those. We highlight, these are all the fees that the lease contemplates that you're going to pay. And this is the base. This is the estimated CAM fee based on what's in here. Often it's an additional exhibit or whatever to the lease. Here's what you're going to pay utilities, so you better ask what the utilities fees are. And here are the other fees that are all contemplated in the lease. So whether the numbers are if the numbers are there, we'll report back to the gym owner how much you need to expect to pay every month. If they aren't there, we're going to say, hey, look, you're going to at least pay this amount. You also need to ask the landlord for estimates of what all these others are, because they can be, an additional $500,000, $1,500 a month onto the base rent.
Okay, so that's great. So that's a key tip, is that you can go back to your landlord and say, okay, I'd like to know what the previous year's utilities costs were, just as a ballpark figure, so I can get my head around what I might need to budget for. And again, if it's hotter or colder, those might change. Let me ask you this with specific reference to CAM fees. Does the tenant have any control over that kind of stuff at all? Meaning, like, what if the landlord decides to, like, I'm going to renovate the lobby, repaint everything, buy new furniture, and I'm going to bill a chunk of it back to you in CAM fees? Does that ever come up?
It can. And usually you'll see that in instances where there's like a multi-unit building.
Okay.
So it's not just you in the building. There's maybe 3 or 4 other businesses in the building. Maybe they all share a lobby, or they all share bathrooms or something like that. And if you want to, oftentimes, let me just back up for a second. Oftentimes what you see then is the CAM fee is divided amongst each tenant based on their square footage. And so what you can do, if you don't say, like, you want to try to cut some of that cost and you have no business using the lobby itself, you can go back to the landlord and say, look, we have no intention of using the lobby. We have no intention of using, the lobby's bathroom. We would like a credit against that square footage of that CAM fee, or against the cost of maintaining the lobby, or, like you said, if we're going to redo the lobby, no, we don't want any part of that because we're not going to use it. And that could be a point of negotiation.
Okay. And when you do get a CAM fee, say at the end of the year, I've heard situations where sometimes landlords are just like, hey, you owe us, an extra $8,000. Can you, as a tenant, request an exact breakdown so you understand what is going into the excess that you're paying?
Yes. Yeah. I've never seen a lease that says, and I would never suggest a gym owner sign a lease that says you don't get an opportunity to see how these fees are calculated. You always have an opportunity to ask how the fees are calculated.
Okay. Because I think I've seen some kind of like buddy handshake deals where it's like, oh yeah, okay, on CAM fee. And they're just like, and here's your bill. And the gym owner was like, that's $10,000. And I'd like to know what you were up to with that.
Yep.
Okay, so those are the.
Yeah, I've had. Yeah,
go
no,
ahead.
sorry. Go ahead.
No, you finish that off because I'm going to go on to number 2 on your list. So hit me with the last thing you're going to say there.
I was just going to say that we have assisted some gym owners recently, because of real estate and everything in its current state. Gym owners who are having leases coming up for renewal are seeing massive increases in both base rent and CAM fees, and we've helped gym owners go back and ask for those breakdowns of the CAM fees, and then challenge some of them as well in order to break down some of the CAM fees and remove some of it to reduce that cost.
I'll ask you this because I think it's an important follow-up question for people whose leases are coming up. With crazy real estate stuff that's happening right now, do you have any recourse if your base rent on the renewal goes up by like, $8 a square foot or something large, or are you kind of just SOL?
There's always a point of negotiation.
Okay.
And I don't want to get too much in the weeds as far as like graduating leases every year and things like that. But a really easy thing to do there is to either, if you don't have a real estate broker, contact a real estate broker and ask for some comparables in the area. And that's been a really easy way to see, okay, is this increase justified? Is this increase out of the realm of what else is in the area? And just kind of gives you a little bit more backing to make an argument to the landlord about, look, I've been a great tenant for the last 3 years. I've been paying $10 a square foot. Now you want to jump me to $18 a square foot? Like, that's a little bit excessive. Let's work on this a little bit.
Okay. So the 2 takeaways from this first point are that your base rent number is not the only number you need to budget for, and a lawyer can help you figure out what your total costs are going to be, with some variance based on like utilities and some of those things that change from month to month and year to year. That's the first thing. The second thing is that a lot of stuff seems to be negotiable if you know what you're doing and potentially have some skills there, which a lawyer might have. And me as a gym owner, I might not have those.
Yep. Everything is negotiable.
Okay. And that's good. And I've learned that in the media world, people say, how much does it cost to hire a photographer? I'm like, We can cut any deal you want. We can find one at this rate. We can, like, there's all sorts of deals. I think that's a lot of that can be done, but I think a lot of gym owners might not feel like they can do that negotiation without some legal backing to say, here's what's available. Here's what we can do. Here's some concessions we can do, and so forth. So I love those 2 points. What was the second thing on your list of our big things that gym owners need to look at with regards to lease?
We always really focus in on what's called the use of premises.
Yeah, this is a huge one.
Yeah. So usually the commercial landlord has no idea what you're doing as a gym owner, especially if you're in some sort of functional fitness or powerlifting gym, i.e. you're going to make a lot of noise.
I got a story I'll hit you with after this.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
So what happens is you go in and you start talking to the landlord, or you talk to the landlord's broker, whatever, and you get this form lease that kicks back at you. And the use of premise says something like, we agree that the tenant will be using this as a gym or a gymnasium, sometimes I see, or a fitness facility. And then that's it. And then later on in the lease, there's all kinds of other language about requiring what's called the quiet enjoyment of the leased premises. And so we end up with this conflict because you have to go back to that use of premise and make it far more specific. The landlord needs to know that you're going to make noise. And they need to know that up front, because if you get into it and you just sign the lease, you go, oh yeah, I'm running a fitness facility, cool. And you sign the lease, you go in and you start dropping 450-pound deadlifts, somebody's going to call you and you're going to have a problem.
So I think what you're probably looking at a lot of cases, and this happened to me, is like, you'll see when we were looking at for buildings, you'll see boilerplate stuff where it's just like, this is a retail lease or this is a whatever. And it's just the same lines always, chunked into the same sections and so forth. It doesn't apply to a CrossFit gym or a functional fitness gym or a weightlifting gym or whatever. So you've got these, and it happened with us where we had a building owner who thought, you guys would be a great fit for our basement. We'd love to have a gym facility for our upstairs tenants, and in an office building, we'd love to have you guys down here. Let's talk it out. I was like, okay. So what I did was I went down there and we brought 135 pounds. So a barbell and 2 45-pound plates. And I told him to go stand in the lobby, and I dropped it from overhead one time. And he literally sprinted down the stairs and he says, what the F was that? And I said, that was one time, and that was 135 pounds. Imagine double that, like 60 times with 40 people.
Yep.
He's like, you can't rent here. So
that's exactly right.
One of the hugest things that we see in our forums, whether the CrossFit Facebook group or even some of the broader ones that are public, is gym owners who are stuck in leases where shortly after signing, they've run grace or they've run some loud workout or they've cranked their music and their landlord has an issue. So I'm getting from you, the important thing to do is to lay it out ahead of time, exactly what's going to happen. Like, so are we talking about like levels of noise, like in terms of decibels, or just saying like, this will be loud? Or how do you protect yourself going in so that the landlord has little cause to come back and say, hey, this is too loud?
I like to just put a sentence in there that's something very similar to, the tenant will be operating a fitness facility known to cause excessive noise and play loud music.
I love it.
Just put that in there.
Okay. When that's in there and a landlord comes back and says, wow, it's too loud, do you have pretty good backing then to say, hey, it's in the lease, we told you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because then you're going to, as I mentioned earlier, there's always going to be a provision in there that says, that you as the tenant are agreeing to maintain the quiet enjoyment of the premises. And you then have to go back to the landlord also and tell them you can't sign that because you're not going to respect the quiet enjoyment of the premises. So you get that pulled out. And then you're right. By that point, the landlord's got to be on enough notice that you're going to make enough noise. They're going to have a real hard time coming back and yelling at you for making too much noise in the long run.
Okay. So that's a huge one, because again, so many times I run into, and it's maybe changing a little bit now that functional fitness is becoming more common, but I've run into so many landlords who think gym and they think of like, the sort of quiet bodybuilding gym with like a set of machines where you walk around and nothing hits the floor ever, except maybe like your water bottle. That's not the case in a lot of these things. Here's a question. If a gym owner is currently in a lease and is having conflict with their landlords over noise, what do you do if you haven't put that clause in there in the first place and the landlord is coming back at you? Are you kind of screwed, or is that a negotiation point where you can try and figure something out, or you just got to move? What do you do?
Well, the first thing you got to do is, if you really want to try to negotiate it, is you got to talk to the landlord. Usually if it's a problem where it's like the landlord's upset because you're making too much noise, they're not going to want to negotiate anything that's going to allow you to continue to make the noise.
Okay.
So you do end up in a situation where you could be SOL at that point, and you're going to have to start spending a bunch of money for noise mitigation. We've seen leases where the noise mitigation is written in there from the beginning, because they know what they're going to do. So yeah, once you sign, these are legally binding contracts. They're real hard to change until they come up for renewal.
Yeah. And I literally saw this morning. It popped up in one of the CrossFit owners groups saying, hey, any ideas on how to dampen the noise of this? And like, I got to tell you that there aren't very many ways to do it. I've seen all sorts of stuff. In fact, Chris Cooper wrote an article about a gym in Manhattan with condos above and their whole situation. I think they ended up pouring $1 million into like, cutting the floor and doing all sorts of stuff. And I'm not even making that number up. I think it was $1 million into like trying to get the floor, unattached from the columns and transferring vibrations and all that stuff. And they had crazy angry tenants upstairs with good reason, using decibel meters to try and calculate vibrations. And it became a horrible, horrible thing. So I got to say, like, just from my anecdotal observations, you can't fix this problem after the fact. If you're making noise, you probably should be like writing that into a lease or making sure the building you're in is full of like, industrial welders and auto body mechanics and people who are making as much noise as you are.
Yeah, nobody cares.
Right.
And the other issue that you run into with the use of premise is, again, if you're running one of these functional fitness gyms, you're probably going to have people running outside.
Yeah.
I like to recommend that gets written in the use of premise as well, is that not only are you going to use the building, but you're also going to use the surrounding area outside of the building for lot sprints or 400-meter runs or whatever it is, whatever the reason, 400-meter walking lunges, whatever it is.
Okay. So listeners, I'd recommend that if you are getting involved in leases and so forth, you might want to talk to Matthew at gymlawyers.com. At the very least, if you don't do that, and you are working with a lawyer at present, you need to make damn sure that lawyer understands exactly what your gym does, right? If your lawyer thinks that you're doing a bodybuilding situation with machines and you're slamming powerlifting barbells, you're not going to get the advice that you need. So you need to make sure you brief that lawyer on exactly what's going on. And it's so great that there's so many lawyers that are now in the functional fitness community, guys like Matthew who can help you with that. But if you run into an old schooler who doesn't know what's up, make sure you brief them. Now, number 3, Matthew, what was the third thing, the big one on your list?
Maintenance and insurance costs.
Okay. Hit me with that. That is a big one.
Okay. So the common thing the common verbiage that people are going to talk about and you might hear is if they say triple net. And so what triple net essentially means is that the tenant is responsible for every cost of the landlord. These are pretty awful leases if you get stuck in one of these things, because
you're a landlord, right?
If you're a landlord, sure, you have no cost, no out-of-pocket costs whatsoever. But they're not only, aside from the CAM fees, there's going to be maintenance fees like HVAC stuff that's going to pop up in the building, replacing light bulbs. Not all of that is covered in the CAM fees. It's going to be covered in the maintenance fees.
Property taxes, is that one?
Operating taxes, yep. Property taxes.
Okay.
Yep.
So
yearly taxes, anything like that. Yep. And then insurance, building insurance. So we always make sure that the lease itself has a provision that says the landlord has to maintain insurance on the building, because surprisingly, that's not in all the leases. But then, the tenant needs to understand whether or not they're responsible for paying that yearly insurance as well. It kind of seems backwards to me, but the industry supports it, so the landlords get away with it.
Okay. So is there room to negotiate on a triple net? And I think I've seen these referred to as NNN leases or 3N leases. Is that, yeah. So if you see those terms, that's what we're talking about. Is there any negotiation room on something like this, or are you just kind of stuck with that's the deal and you've got to budget those costs?
No, again, everything is negotiable.
Okay.
It really depends on the market itself. I would say it's probably going to be the biggest factor. If the space that you're going after is just out in the middle of nowhere and nobody is really going to be going after the space, then you have a lot more negotiable power than you do if, it's like buying a house. If you go to buy a house and you want to pay $200,000 for the house, but there's 3 other people or 3 other couples trying to bid on the same house, it's just going to raise the price and make the house harder to get. Same thing with a lease. If there's 3 other businesses looking at this space, then the landlord's going to be far less willing to negotiate on some of these terms than they will be if this has been sitting vacant for a year or two and he's not getting any bites on it for anybody to rent it. But yeah, triple net is negotiable. And oftentimes what you'll see is either an increase in base rent, not up to the extent of covering all of these costs, but an increase in base rent, or you can always negotiate an increase in time of the lease, the term of the lease, whether it's 4, 5, 6, 7 years.
In these triple net leases, some of the stuff you listed off that is included, it sounds like this can really add up fast. Am I right about that?
Yes, it can. It can.
Okay. Because I'm thinking just in terms of property taxes on a functional fitness facility that's say, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 square feet, you could run into some crazy numbers there all of a sudden. And I did hear about one of the, it was one of the oldest, not oldest in terms of age, but one of the longest standing CrossFit affiliate owners in the world. I think he actually closed down an affiliate because a triple net lease, when it got to there were some cost increases and he was responsible for them. And I think he had to get out of that facility ASAP when his lease was up, because it was just if I recall, the numbers were in the tens of thousands of dollars that increase. Is that a common scenario that happens like that when just costs balloon and all of a sudden you're responsible for more?
I don't know that I wouldn't say it's common that costs increase by that much. Okay. More commonly, what we see is gym owners originally are when they're opening up their gym, they're desperate to get into a space. And so what they'll do is they'll agree to a triple net lease just because they're like, I got to get my space. I got to get my gym open. Everything will be okay. And then it comes up for renewal. And now they're kind of stuck between this rock and a hard place of, I've now been operating in this space for 5 years, but my landlord wants me to re-sign a triple net lease that now I understand what that is. And I understand how much cost is now associated with that. But there's also a significant cost with moving my gym and finding a new location and getting a new lease, et cetera, et cetera. You have to do it often 6 months in advance of the end of your current lease. So it not necessarily that it increases, it just becomes this thing that you can't get rid of. So once you sign the lease that's got triple net, it's really hard to then get out of that when it comes time to renew it.
So we're going to wrap this show up and we're going to follow up. I have some more questions for you that we're going to put in a part 2. But for the first section here, we're talking about leases. What is the best thing that a gym owner can do to protect themselves overall when it comes to leases? Is it contact you? Or what do they do? Because again, you're looking at these 45-page documents that I saw them. I don't have a clue what they are. Clause this, subsection this, I don't know what I'm doing. So how does your basic gym owner protect themselves to the nth degree or as much as they can?
Right. Yeah. Well, obviously contact me, right?
Mm-hmm.
No,
but I mean, you're offering a service that wasn't available when I opened a gym, so this would have helped me big time. Luckily I had the wife of a member, jumped in and saved my butt. Mm-hmm. But legitimately, this is a service that gym owners have been begging for. So I'm glad you opened this thing. But let's say someone doesn't use you. Is it just get a lawyer and try and figure this out? What do they do?
Yeah. And thanks for that, Mike. I appreciate you saying all of that. Now,
it's the truth.
At the very least, get somebody to look at it and not, I've had gym owners call me and say, well, I had a real estate broker look at this and he or she said blank. And that's don't go for the real estate broker. Go for an attorney who knows legally what people get sued on through these things and what's potentially going to pop up. Now, that's at the base, get an attorney. Now, as you said, kind of alluded through this show, is a base attorney may or may not be good enough because we have a unique industry and there's going to be unique problems that pop up. And I can tell you stories as well of local gym owners here who have had issues with inexperienced attorneys, and not inexperienced in the sense of the law, but inexperienced in the sense of how the law relates to owning a gym. I would say the biggest problem that we see is gym owners coming to us too late in the game. An easy example of this is I had somebody reach out and it was an email and the gym owner said, I need you, I'm wondering what it would be like for you to review this lease for me. And I said, yeah, no problem. Here's what we do and here's the service. And, we look at it and we provide a point by point brief and analysis of what it is that you're agreeing to. And we send that all back to you. And he said, okay, well, let me finish up my negotiations and then I'll send it to you for a final review.
Whoa.
And it's like, no, that's the exact opposite time you need to send it to me, because once you're done with all negotiations and you've agreed to the landlord that these are the final terms and all you got to do is put your signature on it, what am I going to review?
Yeah. All you're doing is you're putting that yellow sign here sticker on and saying that's where you put your name.
Yeah. Now I'm going to come up with a whole bunch of problems that I have with the lease, but it's too late. You've already told the landlord that you're good to go with the lease. So get somebody in the beginning. Is the beginning, would you talk to an attorney before you even start looking, or would you talk to an attorney when you're like starting, like I have a space that I'm looking at, they supply, a lease from their, from their side. What's the exact right time to get an attorney involved? I believe the exact right time is when you start looking.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean that you're going to incur a cost when you start looking. Okay. That's the other thing that I think kind of gets commonly misunderstood is, people think, well, as soon as I call an attorney, it's going to cost me $500 or whatever, $1,000. And that's not the case. But some commercial landlords will utilize what's called a letter of intent. And so you go and you look at a space and you're like, yeah, I love the space. Let's start negotiating the lease. And then the next thing you know, you get what's called a letter of intent, which is a letter from the landlord that outlines what could be the terms of the lease, and will put pressure on you as the gym owner to sign it, let's say within 5 days of the receipt of the letter of intent, in order to secure you as sort of like the right of first refusal on the premises. And so this legal stuff starts from the second you find a location. So real important, even when you just start looking, to just call us, send us an email and say, I'm looking, what should I know about while I'm looking? It's not going to cost you anything until we start. I like to say it doesn't cost you anything until I start actually thinking about things. Right. And then I'm going to charge you for my thoughts. But just in the initial to say, hey, we're going out, we're looking, and what should we know about? I've got pamphlets I can send you, like the 6, what we've kind of been talking about today, the top 6 areas of commercial leases that you need to know about. I'll send you that document. And so you can start looking at this stuff, talking about this stuff when you're looking at commercial spaces. And then right away, I like this commercial space. And then we really start stepping in and helping you negotiate the lease or the letters of intent.
Okay. Because we're talking a lot about budgeting, and I know everything is very different depending on the intricacies of everything, length of leases, but how much should people set aside ballparking for legal review of a lease? Like what's too much for, or what's not enough? What should people start putting into their opening costs for legal fees?
Mm-hmm. So, a basic just review of a lease, and that's it. We'll probably run you a couple $100. Okay. You're looking at, an attorney is probably going to take about an hour or so to look through one, because like you said, they're 40 pages long, they're 25 pages long, and it's legally stuff. We got to sit down, we got to pine through this language a little bit. If you're going to use an attorney through the entire process, like we're talking about right now, and strongly suggesting, you should be budgeting somewhere around $500 to $1,000.
Okay. And I can tell you that when I heard numbers like that 10, 11 years ago, when I was signing leases, I was like, oh man, I was starting to worry because that's like 3 barbells I couldn't buy. But when I paid that cost, it did come back in the end because I ran into some stuff that the lawyer had changed that saved me that money plus way more. So I would say the return on my investment there, and it took a couple of years to get there, but I'd say the return on my investment personally was in the realm of like 4 to 5x. So definitely worth it. But at the time I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. It did pay off.
Right.
So if people want to contact, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I was going to throw one other little example in there, if you don't mind.
Please. Hit it.
Sometimes we review a lease and our suggestion is don't sign it. And I think that's where a lot of our value comes in is, the landlord or the gym owner comes to us and says, would you mind looking at this lease for us? And we look at it and we say, don't sign it. And they've spent, maybe $500, but ended up saving tens of thousands of dollars over a 5-year term of a lease because of the problems that we found in the lease.
The New York example I went through with Manhattan, potentially that would have been $1 million savings right there. And that's, again, not an exaggeration. You can find that article by Chris Cooper. I believe that he's in the CrossFit Journal. Matthew, where can people contact you if this is a service that they want to engage in?
Mm-hmm. The best way is just to go to our website, jimlawyers.com. We have calls to action all over the website. My cell phone number is actually in the contact on that website also. If you really want to start by email, it's matt@jimlawyers.com. But I always just throw people to the website because there's so much information there, and the calls to action and the email forms and everything are all right there.
Perfect. So this is going to be part 1 of this series. In part 2, we are going to talk about buying and selling a gym. So that was Matthew Becker. He is a gym owner and he is the man behind jimlawyers.com. I'm your host, Mike Warkentin. Be sure to subscribe for more episodes.